There was a moment when Ford built a car so controversial, some people inside the company wanted it forgotten forever. Not because it was ugly, not because it was slow, and not because nobody noticed it. The problem was much worse than that. People noticed it immediately, and for a brief moment, it looked like one car might damage the reputation of one of the most powerful automakers in America. Because sometimes, the most dangerous car a company ever builds is not the one that fails quietly. It is the one that almost changes everything. And in Ford's case, that car was the Ford Edsel. Today, the Edsel is remembered as one of the most famous failures in automotive history. But the truth is far more complicated than most people realize. Because the Edsel was not just a bad car. It was a car that arrived carrying impossible expectations, and those expectations may have destroyed it before it even reached the road. In the 1950s, Ford was desperate. General Motors was dominating the American market. Chevrolet was strong, Pontiac was rising, Cadillac owned luxury, and Ford feared something dangerous. They feared being left behind. Executives believed the company needed a completely new car. Something bold, something futuristic. Something that could sit between Ford and Mercury. Something that could attract ambitious, middle-class buyers who wanted more than an ordinary family sedan. So Ford made a decision that seemed brilliant at the time. They would create an entirely new brand. Not just a model. A brand. And they poured enormous money into it. Millions of dollars. Massive advertising. Secret planning. Years of development. Inside Ford, people believed this car could reshape the company's future. Some executives even thought it might become one of the most important launches in Ford history. That level of confidence created dangerous pressure. Because when a company promises greatness, anything less feels like failure. Then the car was finally revealed. And America stared. Because the Edsel looked different. Very different. Strange, ugly. Its front grille was unlike anything else on the road. Tall, oval, strange. Some people thought it looked futuristic. Others thought it looked awkward. And almost immediately, the jokes began. People compared the grille to everything from a horse collar to something much less flattering. And once people start laughing at a car, anything less feels like failure. But the appearance was only the beginning. The bigger problem was the hype. Ford had promoted the Edsel like it would change the entire industry. Newspapers talked about it. Television talked about it. Dealers prepared huge launch events. Customers walked into showrooms expecting a miracle. And when people expect a miracle, a normal car can feel disappointing. That was exactly what happened. Because underneath all the advertising, the Edsel was still just a car, and not a perfect one. Some early models had quality issues, assembly problems, fit and finish complaints, mechanical frustrations. None of those issues alone would have destroyed the car, but combined with impossible expectations, they became devastating. Because buyers were not judging the Edsel like an ordinary car. They were judging it like a promise. And to many people, Ford had broken that promise. Sales began falling, fast, much faster than Ford expected. Dealers who had invested heavily became nervous, executives became anxious, and inside the company, panic started spreading. Because the Edsel was not supposed to fail, it was supposed to win. Ford had spent enormous money trying to create a symbol of the future. They created a symbol of disappointment. And perhaps the most painful part was this. The Edsel was not completely terrible. Some owners actually liked them. Some praised the ride. Some praised the features. Some believed the car was simply misunderstood. But in the car business, perception can be stronger than reality. And by that point, the Edsell's reputation had already been written. It became the car people mocked, the car comedians joked about, the car critics pointed to when talking about corporate mistakes. And once that image formed, there was almost no way back. Ford tried to save it. They changed styling. They adjusted the lineup. They reduced prices. But the damage was already done, because the public had made up its mind. And in just a few short years, Ford ended production. The company quietly moved on, and the Edsell became something few cars ever become: a warning. For decades, its name became shorthand for failure. If a product failed badly, people called it an Edsell. That was how deeply the story entered American culture. And for Ford, that was painful, because the company did not just lose money. It lost pride. It lost confidence. And it learned an expensive lesson: that sometimes the danger is not building a bad car. The danger is convincing the world a car is revolutionary before people ever touch it. For years, many people believed Ford wanted the Edsell erased from memory. And in some ways, that was understandable, because the car represented embarrassment, a public mistake, a rare moment when one of America's biggest companies misread the market. But time has a strange way of changing how people see failure. Because decades later, something unexpected happened. Collectors started looking at the Edsell differently, not as a joke, but as a piece of history. Because the very thing that once made people reject it, made it fascinating later. It was different, and rare, and impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the car that once made Ford uncomfortable became a conversation piece. At car shows, people stop when they see one. Not because it was the greatest car ever made, but because it tells a story. A story about risk. And a story about what happens when a company tries too hard to predict the future. That is what makes the Edsell unforgettable. It was not just a failed car. It was a car that became bigger than itself. A machine that turned into a lesson. And maybe that is why people still talk about it now. Because the Edsell reminds us that some cars are remembered for winning, and some cars are remembered because they nearly changed everything for the wrong reasons. So now the question is simple. If you had walked into a Ford showroom in 1958 and seen the Edsell sitting under bright lights for the first time, would you have seen a disaster? Or would you have seen a car the world judged too quickly? And maybe that is what makes the Edsell so fascinating today. Because most failed cars disappear. People forget them. Manufacturers stop talking about them. And history quietly moves on. But the Edsell never completely disappeared. Because it became more than a machine. It became a reminder. A reminder that even the biggest companies can misjudge the future. A reminder that hype can sometimes destroy the very thing it was meant to save. And a reminder that some cars become legendary, not because they succeeded, but because they failed so publicly that the world could never stop talking about them. Today, when collectors stand around an Edsell at a car show, they are not just looking at old steel. They are looking at one of the boldest gambles Ford ever made. A car that was supposed to define the future, but instead became one of the most unforgettable mistakes in automotive history. And maybe that is why people still stare at it now. Because deep down, everyone wants to understand the same thing. How could a car with so much promise become the one Ford could never truly escape?